Today, on Independent Wrestling Profiles, we're talking with the Karachi Driver, Harun. When was it that the industry first became apparent to you?
So for me, wrestling, entered my life when I was about 6 or 7 years old. It might be a little different than like your typical story of discovering wrestling. For me, it wasn't watching wrestling. It started by playing the video games. When I was like 6 or 7 years old, my older brother bought me one of those old PlayStation portables, the PSPs that everybody had back then. It was like the craze, and I mean, it was a really like sweet and intuitive gaming device at the time. But when I got that from him, one of the games he got me, those little UMD discs that would come with the PSP, was I believe it was SmackDown versus Raw 2006. Amazing game, by the way. It's like one of the best of all time, I feel. And that's kind of like how my exposure to wrestling came to be. I started playing the video games, and to me, it was almost like playing like Mortal Kombat or something. I didn't understand, like, are these real people? Are they made up characters for the game? And then, like, as I was playing, a few weeks, few months pass, and I'm watching TV, and then I see the same characters that are on this game on the TV, and it was very interesting to me. I'm like, oh, okay, this is like a real thing. These are real people. Because I mean, when you're dealing with anything wrestling related, they're very larger than life characters, right? Which is very fascinating. And growing up as a kid, like as a toddler, I was always into comic book movies and superheroes. So for me, like, being able to distinguish between fiction and reality was kind of it was a bit of a blur, especially as I was such a young kid. But I started to really realize that, okay, well, WWE wrestlers, they're real people, and they're doing this. And obviously, as you're growing up, wrestling feels very real to you. You feel like it is a legitimate competition. The Undertaker is literally Walking Dead person. And then you grow up and realize that it's all an intricate performance. And that, for me, that was the turning point. So I started playing the video games led me into watching the actual product on TV, which I found very fascinating. And as I grew a little older, when I was like, I believe around 10 years old, I realized that, okay, well, I don't like calling it fake personally, especially being a wrestler. I now realize, I'm very humbly realizing that it is not fake. It's more so staged, and things are orchestrated, obviously, and it's a performance. But when I did realize that, okay, well, this is not exactly real, that's when my fascination for wrestling grew even more. For a lot of people, I feel like growing up with like friends and family, they felt cheated out by it. They were like, oh, no, okay, it's not real. Yeah, well, screw that. I'm not going to watch that. For me, it was like, no, I want to watch it even more now. I'm like, how do they do this? They're not even like, what? That's crazy. So that's what grew my fascination in terms of like, just going on YouTube and spending countless hours understanding, the history of the business. I remember 12 years old, and like I was watching all these videos of, like, they used to have these videos on YouTube where they're like, unmasking or exposing pro wrestling moves, which is basically just showing how they go about, like, executing certain moves, how wrestlers communicate in the ring, so on and so forth. So that all got me like really hooked onto it. And I was like, this is so cool. I want to really try it, because it's not like an actual sport where you kind of just like, it's not like playing basketball, right? It's not like shooting hoops where you kind of just show up and do it. It's more so like you got to get the right training in there. You got to make sure that you execute moves safely. You got to understand the psychology of how you move around in the ring. So there's all these moving parts, and it just seemed like such a unique challenge, and like nobody really does this thing, right? So that kind of got me hooked on to pro wrestling. And I mean, I've been doing it for actually 3 years now. I think today is exactly 3 years since we started in wrestling, when we had our debut, had our first match. So it's been one hell of a journey, and I can't be like more thankful than how it's turned out. It's been amazing.
Something you said there is actually very fascinating to me, because a lot of people go into the video games after they're introduced to the product. And the thing I'm really curious about is, I know I play fighting games, for example, and I like a particular character. And then, say Mortal Kombat. Oh man, Johnny Cage is so cool. And then you watch the movie and you're like, oh man, his personality is kind of crappy. Did you have like a favorite wrestler to play as on the video game that when you started watching, you were like, oh man, I don't like this guy. Like, was there a big contrast between who you liked in the game and then who you found that you really actually liked in the product?
That is actually a great question you brought up because I did have someone like that. For me, it was Edge. I mean, I used to play as Edge all the time, and like when I watched him on TV, I think this was so the around the time I was playing the games and understanding wrestling and what was going on in terms of like the program on the TV. I believe it was when Edge was with Vicky Guerrero, and they had like Zack Ryder and Kurt Hawkins with him and the whole Familia and everything going on. So for me, like playing him on the video games was one thing. I think like they would have all these stats to show that like, yeah, he's a heel. Like you would understand that like he's not a good person. But then I would watch him on TV and see the kind of things he was doing. And like for me, he's like the best case study of like what a heel should be. Like I was so like just like disgusted by him. I'm like, he's such a cheater. He does all these things. I was like 6 years old, and like he had that whole celebration with Lita in the middle of the ring, and I was like, I had no idea what the hell was going on. I was like panicking. But as I grew older, I tend to appreciate that so much more now because what heels are doing is just so much more. To me, it's so much more cooler because you're going out of your way to make sure people hate you, and you're doing all these terrible things, even though you're not a terrible human being, hopefully. But that was Edge for me. I was like, playing the games was one thing, but then actually seeing on a weekly basis what he's doing on the program was just like, that's crazy. Like, so that was definitely, that was Edge for me for sure. He was like number one like heel on my list, and I grew to love him for that.
Was there any other performers when you got to the actual real like shows that kind of rose to the top as some of your favorites?
Yeah, for me, I mean, quite immediately it was CM Punk. He really stood out to me. Grew up being a huge fan of his. Parts of his straight edge lifestyle I've adopted into my life. I mean, I've never drank or smoked or done drugs or anything like that, and I give a lot of credit to CM Punk for that. I mean, one thing is like having like because I do come from like a religious background. I am Muslim. My entire family is, so that's one thing that we have like our religious limitations. But there's also a thing, and I always tell people this, like I don't think it matters what religion or if any religion I came from. I feel like if I was exposed to wrestling, and in particular someone like CM Punk from a young age, I would still hold these beliefs because he just had such a lasting impression on me. Because I did start watching wrestling seriously when he was doing the Straight Edge Society. I believe this was around like 09, 2010. And I just thought it was the coolest thing because I'm like, there's this group, and like I just felt like I was like, there's a group that they're not doing things that everybody finds, is cool to do. And I thought that was even cooler. I'm like, well, you're kind of like, you're like, you're rebelling against what's like considered normal or whatnot. And then the idea to me was, I was like, well, things he's saying is not wrong. I mean, he's telling people, the negative side effects of like, being an alcoholic, and then he's telling you not to do it. So like, honestly, he's kind of looking out for people's health, but he was still getting food for it. So I was like, and that's when I started realizing how like complicated the nature of like, playing a heel character is, because sometimes you could be saying all the right things, but people just hate you for it, right? Like maybe your delivery, your tone, or like you're just as a person, they don't like your like who you are, and they just don't want to hear from you. So all those things are very interesting. But yeah, I mean, for me, CM Punk definitely rose to the top, and like like that straight edge lifestyle bit I have also applied in my own life and have held on to that this whole time. Another would be The Miz. I mean, it was a very random one, but like I would watch him on TV. This was around the time when I think he had the Money in the Bank contract, and then he won it against Randy Orton. This was like late 2010. And I thought it was really cool because nobody thought he would ever win like the world title at that stage, at least, right? It was a very like typical underdog come up story. Nobody wanted him in the business. He came from reality TV. And I just thought, I was like, well, this is someone that clearly to everybody around him in the industry, they don't want him there, but he, fought for it and made a place for himself. And it was very inspiring for me, even though he was a heel. Right. So, and like now you might be noticing, I'm literally mentioning all these heel characters. So it'll show you how much I love them, regardless of like them, going about their evil tactics. I feel like deep down, all these like heel wrestlers have a, very complex nature that you can like really study. So The Miz is also one of them. I will say though, I mean, honorable mention, like when I started watching wrestling, obviously for me it was like John Cena and Batista, and it's because they were on the cover of SmackDown versus Raw. Man, John Cena's just like, he's like the Superman of wrestling. And like, I feel like every kid just falls in love with him instantly. And that was the case with me. But as I grew older, I was like, I started really appreciating, the heels and the very, multifaceted characters that we'd see in wrestling.
Honestly, before I move on to my next question, I just want to say, for all the skeptical wrestling people or wrestling critics that say it's fake, try to argue the influence that it has. I mean, making people straight edge, you can't say that it doesn't touch people's lives and impact them in a way that is just like you can't quantify it.
Absolutely. No.
So, growing up as a wrestling fan, you've now been exposed to video games, you've been exposed to the television product. Have you had a chance to expose yourself to the live event? Did you get to go and see performers in real life, feel the crowd, the electricity all around you, like actually get a taste of a live performance?
So for me, that didn't come until middle school. I was in the eighth grade. They were doing when WB does like their live event. Luke, they were doing something in Toronto. At the time, it was the Rico Coliseum, which is now the Coca Cola Coliseum. So they had an event there. I believe it was I think it was like spring of 2014. That was like my very first live event. And a bunch of like my favorites were there. Obviously, I think Dolph Ziggler was on the card. The Shield was there. They main evented against the Wyatt family. So this is when Bray Wyatt, Luke Harper, and Eric Rowan was just a trio. So and I remember like I was very invested in that storyline because I thought the Shield was amazing as a trio. And I thought the Wyatt family, like they were the two like top trios. And when they had their whole feud going on, I think it was Elimination Chamber 2014. And then after that, they were doing a little bit of stuff until Shield kind of transitioned into work in Evolution during the first half of that year. But at that house show, they main evented, and I think they had like a TLC match or like a tables match or something, and it was amazing. Like it was just like a house show, but the energy was there. And for me as like a young kid growing up, idolizing all these wrestlers and like seeing them in real life, even from like a distance, was like the biggest deal for me. I was like 14, but I remember just like I still have like little videos of it. Like I went with one of my brothers, and like he was just filming, the entrances, and then kind of like pans over to me, and I'm like just jumping up and down. Like I'm so excited to see everybody, and it was good, man. I mean, that I think that really put things into perspective for me, where I really wanted to like do it because I felt like how like it feels to be in the building at the time of a pro wrestling show when they're doing it, when they're in the ring wrestling, like how like the crowd around them is responding to it, how they're feeling. Like they're all so energetic when they're in there because like, and now as I wrestle, I understand that too. I see it like, when you're in the ring and things are going well and the crowd is, responsive, you feel it and it pushes you through. Like even if you're tired, you might have gotten hurt like earlier on in the match, you still, pull through because that adrenaline is just like, it's, through the roof. So that was really an amazing experience. And I went to a couple house shows after that too, like around when I was in high school. I didn't actually get to go to my first televised event until 2 summers ago, which was also in Toronto. It was, I believe, it was an episode of Monday Night Raw, and then it had that was the first time I ever saw Edge. So I believe he wrestled Damian Priest, if I'm not wrong, and that was a great match. But yeah, just being there in that environment, like the ACC, like the Scotiabank Arena, sorry, is a little larger, and TV wrestling is a bit different. Like you can tell, it's not like a house show. It's a bit more, organized, and they're, going through things and doing things in a certain manner, which is also very interesting because I wasn't I was no longer watching it from the perspective of a fan because it was just 2 years ago. I was about a year into wrestling at that point. So I was watching it really from like multiple perspectives. I was trying to enjoy the show, but I was also trying to understand, okay, well, how do they do this? Like, because this is their jobs. This is what they do every single week, right? So that was really cool too. It gives you like an insight on how it is when you're in the arena versus what you watch on, a television screen.
Well, number one, don't apologize because it'll always be the ACC to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so used to that now. I can't call it Scotiabank too long. ACC is the name.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about the trigger event. Obviously, this could have had a large portion of it, and even from a very young age, you might have had in the back of your mind this idea that I want to be a pro wrestler. But what happens where you actually take that leap, where you decide to pick up the phone or send that email and take that first step to actually training yourself?
Yeah, so I really appreciate how you mentioned that there's obviously, multiple, trigger points, you could say, right? Like certain instances where you're like, oh, I want to wrestle, and then you finally do it. So the one where it was like, pick up the phone. I mean, I didn't actually literally pick up the phone because I could just, email them or, but we're, and I think you've interviewed a few of us. We're all from Battle Arts, a couple of us, like guys in Dynasty, everybody in KPK, basically, like where we all started out at Battle Arts for the most part. And that's where we've been training. That's where we continue to train. It was around the time, I think it was 2014. So for me, for a few years prior to Battle Arts opened in 2013. So yeah, a few years prior to that, like from the age of like 9, 10, I was kind of, thinking about it. I'm like, I really want to wrestle, but I had no idea. I'm like, I had no idea how they do it. I just thought like, there's these larger than life humans that like get picked off like the street or something to come and, wrestle at like, in the WB or at TNA or whatever. So I didn't know what the process is like of training. I didn't know certain, like I knew the Hardy Boys were like backyarders, but then I'm like, my whole thing was I'm like, well, my parents won't allow me to get a ring in the backyard and start doing this on my own. So I'm like, how do I do it? What do I do? So I did a little more research and like, I mean, this isn't too long ago, but like 10, 12, 13 years ago, like the internet was still not, it was great, but not as great as it is now. Because if I was a kid now, I mean, Chat GPT would tell me everything in like a split second that I need to know. So I had to go through all these websites and this and that to understand like how do wrestlers do what they do. And like I'm watching documentaries, I'm like, oh, they go to like a school. So there's like a training school. They have rings in there and this and that. And as I'm like dealing with all this in 2013, I'm just on Facebook and I'm like scrolling through like my iPod Touch. I see a picture of Santino Marella, Anthony Corelli, just standing with someone, and the backdrop is like this, this wallpaper that's just Battle Arts Academy. And I was just like, what is that? And I Google it. It's like in Mississauga, Ontario, where I live to this day, there is a new state of the art facility for boxing, judo, pro wrestling. And I saw pro wrestling and I was like, to me, dude, like even as a kid, it was like, I felt like I'm like, well, now I have to do it because I'm like, how is there an entire school for this at my doorstep? I felt like at the time, like, I mean, I don't want to sound like I have like main character syndrome or something, but at the time I felt like I manifested this, right? Like this is meant for me. Like I need to do this now. So yeah, when I found out about the Battle Arts Academy, I was like, no, this is where I need to go. Like this is it. Like this is perfect. It's, it's owned by someone who's in the WB or was in the WB because I knew like Santino Marella, watched him growing up, right, on TV. I'm like, and then I remember seeing a video of theirs on Facebook when it opened and all of these guys came in. I think guys like Daniel Bryan, Kofi Kingston, like all of like Santino's friends, they all came to support and to promote the facility. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is it. Like, this is, my ticket to like becoming a pro wrestler. So I spent now the next couple of years just, going through school and getting ready for that because I was like, it was always in the back of my mind. I'm like, now there is this, tangible place that I can show up at and do this. So like for me, the biggest goal in like, my late teen years was, okay, well, I got to get through school, but as I'm getting through school, like I'm saving some money on the side because I know, how much wrestling school could cost. So I had a great idea in terms of how I would need to be financially in terms of being able to afford it because I wanted to do it on my own. I mean, I could walk up to my dad and be like, hey, like, I really want to wrestle. Can like, you give me some money or whatever. And I already know the answer. They tell me to go to school, get a job and because they don't really understand, what the hype behind it, the hype behind being a wrestler. So I was like, all right, let me just figure that out on my own. So yeah, I spent a few years and I think around 20, yeah, I was 20 years old. I was about like I was in university still, like second, third year. I was like, I'm just gonna start going in the summers to like train because like I'm still at home and like Battle Arts is very close to me. But that was the summer COVID happened. So the one summer I was ready to go, COVID happens, and I was like, it was frustrating, but I'm like, I mean, everything happens for a reason. So let me just take this time to I don't know work out harder and get more ready for it when it happens. And then surely enough, the following year we all start training all the like KPK guys, I think with the exception of Karu, because he's been around for some time, but myself, Ahmed, Abu, we all started at the same time. This was summer of 2021. And it's been great, man. I mean, we've still been at Battle Arts. I mean, we've had the opportunity to train at different places, but like Battle Arts is where we learned everything. And that's like our, that's kind of like the home base for us.
Do you recall any of your actual feelings when you first started? Maybe the first day, the first week, the first month? Was it excitement? Was there a bit of nervousness? Was there anything that kind of caught you off guard where you're like, man, I knew this was going to be hard, but I wasn't expecting this? Like, just kind of go over those initial reactions to the actual training.
When I started, I was very excited. I mean, there's obviously a little bit of nervousness, but I felt like, like I need to do this, right? So I was very focused, and that focus brought in a lot of excitement for me. And like, even if there was nervousness, it was like, when you feel like good nervous, I didn't feel like hesitant to do like certain things. I was just like, I'll find it out. Like, I'll find out a way to do it. I'll figure it out. There's great coaching here. We've always had like a supportive group, like the group that I came up with, at least like the way our classes were, like the students there at the time, we all looked out for each other and stuff like that. So there was definitely a lot of excitement. There were like obviously certain things like when it comes to just, there's one thing that you could be like super athletic and like get in the ring and do everything right, but everything needs to make sense, right? That's one of our coaches in the start would say. It's like, make it make sense, right? I mean, if you just have an amazing, European uppercut, which I've been told I do have from time to time, but it doesn't make sense if you just do it at like inappropriate times, right? You got to understand the psychology of a match. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Like, everything needs to be, sequential and logical. So I felt like that was a pretty tough thing to understand. Like, and it just takes so much time, and it takes a lot of repetitions and a lot of bad matches to get to that one like good match or acceptable match where you're like, okay, well, everything here is psychologically sound, and the heel played his part, the face played their part, and like we had a good match that told a story. But it takes a while to get there because a lot of times we're just so focused on going from one move to the next, and that's what like I feel like majority of people are guilty of. I've been guilty of, and I feel like I still am in certain situations in certain matches where it's just like remembering everything, right? I mean, I give him two clotheslines, and then like I'm thinking now, and you can tell, like the crowd can even tell that he's thinking like what, like you can there's no give him a clothesline, stand there, do some character work, look around, and then give him another one. It's always like go go go, like you're going really fast. I think I saw or I heard, I believe it was Triple H mentioning it, talking to one of the younger guys, either in NXT or someone on the main roster, telling them that if you think you're going if you think you're going slow, go even slower. I think he said something like that when you're in the ring. And I feel like that's so true because a lot of times we don't realize we're going really fast when we're in the ring. So, when we started training, that there was a lot of that. When you're doing like a heat drill, it's like you think you just got to jump on the guy and start jumping him, right? Because you're just assuming that, oh, that's what you would do in a real fight, which you probably would. But I mean, in wrestling, you really got to space things out, let like things breathe. And we talk a lot about like, let it register, which means like when you do something, even if you punch someone in the head, give it a second, like, because let the other guy sell, let the crowd understand what happened. The logic I like to use is, sometimes people in the crowd, they're on their phone or they might look to the side or something and they might miss what you just did. So, when you do it with like impact and make sure that like everybody took in like what just happened there. So I think a lot of early on in training was understanding that, which made me, respect what we do even more. Because I'm like, well, it's not just about, who's the strongest or the most agile or the fastest or who has the best promos. It's like, you gotta have like, certain set of skills to be able to do this and work on those skills, and obviously have that natural talent and the innate ability towards doing certain things. But everybody needs to understand how to, put everything together in a coherent way, and that's how like you ensure your success as like a wrestler, even on the independent level, right? So yeah.
That's a very valuable point to anybody who's perhaps considering getting into the business. Like, you can have all the pieces, but you need to be able to put them together in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your first match. You're doing your training, you're kind of going through the motions. When do you find out that you're going to get the green light for a match? How do you feel about seeing your name on a card? Is it like an elation, a relief? Is it compounded nervousness? Like, how did your first match come to be, and how did you feel about it?
So if we're talking like our first match, as in like on a student show, that was 3 years ago. That's when we started wrestling. We didn't have like our first indie match, like independent wrestling match, until I think 5 or 6 months after that. This was around close to summer 2022. But like, we, for our student show, it was like our first match in front of like a paid audience. So I mean, I guess it does count, and we did have a match card for that. We found out, I would think, because we all started in the summer of 2021. We're training for a couple of months. We had a few house shows here and there, just in front of like the other students or like any of the members of the gym at the time. And then I believe it was towards like, yeah, like the fall of 2021, we were told that we're gonna do like a holiday show, kind of like a end December student show where like you're gonna sell tickets, bring in family and friends and whatnot, and that'll be like kind of like the culmination of everything we've been doing for the last few months. So there was definitely nervous energy. My first match, it was myself and Ahmed. I mean, that's when we debuted KPK. We were just like a tag team. So anytime, like when I started out, I had maybe one singles match in a house show. But like I took my start in pro wrestling through tag wrestling, which is often considered like, harder than most forms of wrestling. I mean, singles wrestling, it's pretty challenging on its own. But then when you have tag wrestling, that just complicates everything. And you need to really understand the process of how to, like, wrestle in a tag, because there's so many moving parts. I mean, we have 5 people in the ring and we count 5 because the referee is just as important. I feel like the referee is important always, but in tag wrestling, he's even more important, he or she. So for us, it was like, trying to overcome the challenges of understanding tag wrestling and making sure that despite all the moving parts, doing it all, in a manner which makes sense and like it's a good match. Because when it's your debut, I feel like there's a lot of pressure. Because for me, and I still remember that week, and I'm so glad I went through all that. I think I had like my last like set of exams in university. I was doing my road test for the G license, right? The same week, and then a few days later, I would have my debut match in front of like my friends and my family. So the pressure was on immensely, because I'm like, everybody's been hearing for months and years that I want to wrestle and all that. So the friends of mine that were coming, and the family members that were showing up, for me, it was like, okay, well, it's the first impression that they'll get of what I'm doing here. So I got to make sure it's right. If I do anything stupid, they're going to be like, oh no, he's all talk, or like, yeah, no, this is not good. So I was nervous, but I was also excited, because I was like, we've been training really hard, and we trained hard, man. Like every week we were going in, and like we were actually almost rehearsing parts of our matches, because we knew the card like a month or like 2 in advance. Most of us knew like what we were doing. So there were parts of the match that we were going over just to ensure that things move smoothly. And it was a great match. It was, for a debut, what it was great crowd response. It was an amazing night. There was a lot of energy in the building, and I feel like it's because everybody that showed up that day showed up for someone in the wrestling program. So it was them showing up to support someone that is wanting to do this for a while. So like the energy was just through the roof. And I've always said that, like, anytime we get a new set of students at Battle Arts and we do like a student show for them, I'm always like, well, we got to be on the card, because the crowd is going to be nuts tonight, right? Like, because they're always going crazy. When you have like a few shows and you have like the same friends and family like show up 2, 3, 4 times, it starts to quiet down a bit. And then over time, like, usually pretty soon they start to make, they're like, yeah, no, okay, I'll be busy tonight, I won't make it, but I hope you have a great night. Because they kind of like, they're not fans, right? They're just there to show you support. And like, they'll show you support a few times, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm not pinning it on anyone that like they should be showing up to every single show. I'm just saying that, like, in a little early on, people start to move on and away with it. So we're always looking forward to seeing the new group of wrestlers bring in their supporters, and then we just kind of enjoy that too. Like, I remember we had a 6-man match last year. It was KPK versus 3 of the students at Battle Arts, and all their family and friends were there. That was an amazing match. It was a main event for the student show, and it was great. Like, it was just crazy. Like, I had so much fun with that. We all had a lot of fun with that. Everybody loved that match. It was very entertaining. A lot was going on. But I think what made it so valuable was just having that crowd energy, right? And I feel like that's something that had me excited going into my first match. And now that I see other students have their first matches whenever we're at Battle Arts, if we're ever available to work a student show, I mean, it kind of makes me relive that. And I'm like, this is the beauty of it. Like, this is why we do it. I think it's great. And like, anybody who shows up to support you at those shows, like, is someone who, you know, you should hold really close to you, because it really means a lot when like people show up and like, you know, try to cheer you on while you're trying to do this.
You started with KPK immediately, and talking about even past wrestling shows, you highlighted like the Wyatt family and the Shield and things like that. It, this is KPK month, so tell me a little bit about the formation, but also perhaps the influence that these other factions had on kind of leading you into that direction.
Yeah, I mean, KBK started off as a tag team, like I mentioned to you. We were doing, you know, the fall before we debuted 3 years ago. We had a really good when we started wrestling. We had a really good system where we almost had like a syllabus. Like we were going in order of things. Like we all started with like a bump, because it's just like battlers opening up right after COVID. So we were kind of seeing like everybody at the same level. Like all these new people show up. Okay, so what do we make them do? Start doing rolls. Start doing bumps. Start, you know, putting together like do a body slam and like, you know, like a suplex, like put together like a spot, do like a quick like shine drill. So we're going in order. We started doing singles, and then towards the fall, we got into, you know, tag wrestling. We started doing it from the scratch, like, you know, from building it from scratch. So when we were doing that, we would have, I believe it was either an entire class worth of time, or like the first half of a class, one of the days of the week, we would do what we called, I believe it was media day. So we would all just watch tape. Basically, we were doing tape studying, which is just watching wrestling and, you know, pausing at certain moments, and like our coach would explain to us like what's going on here, what is good about this, what is bad about this, just like learning, and you can take notes, right? So we were doing a lot of tag wrestling, you know, tape study back then. And I remember we would just all be sitting in this room, and then Ahmed was there, and myself and Ahmed were the only two people, like we're from Pakistan, like that's our background. So the reason, you know, I been doing the Karachi Driver moniker this entire time is because my family is from a city in Pakistan called Karachi. So that's why I kind of like stay true to my roots, because that's one thing that makes me stand out in the business, right? I mean, how many guys are there that are from Karachi or like use that, you know, term? So I knew like Ahmed was from, he's from Peshawar. He's from a place actually called KPK, which full form stands for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So that's where he's from. And we were just watching wrestling. I'm like, we should do a tag team. Like I just said it as a joke. I'm like, you know, we should be like a, I don't know, like Pakistan Express or something. I said something really stupid, and then our coach heard us, and he loves tag wrestling. So our coach is actually Stone Rockwell, Nick Andrew. He's Asylum. He's one half of the Flatliners. So I'm mentioning this because I feel like if you're listening, you should know he's a tag wrestler. He loves tag wrestling, and he heard that, and he looked at us. But I just saw something in his eyes that day. I was like, he's gonna really like it if we tag. I feel, because a lot of people didn't want to tag. I feel like a lot of times when you start out in wrestling, you kind of want to hog the spotlight. You just want to be like a singles guy. But Ahmed and I were just like, we were down. Like it started off as a joke, but we're like, let's see where it goes. Because I mean, we do have these similarities, like, you know, the background, like the ethnic background and stuff, and like our coach is very encouraging of it. So let's give it a shot. So we just came up with the name KPK, because Ahmed is like, oh, well, that's where I'm from, and I'm like, well, why don't we take the abbreviation KPK and then we turn it into something that applies to both of us, right? So what it was standing for in the start was actually Karachi Peshawar Killers. So both our cities, and then the last K, we're like, what do we do? Killers, Kings, Knights. We didn't want to sound like some intramural hockey team, so we didn't go with Knights or Kings. We're like, let's just do Killers. We're heels. We're kind of aggressive. During this entire time, obviously, like Abu was in the classes. He's one of our close friends, and Abu would drive with Ahmed a lot, and myself too. Like we would always hang out, you know, before or after class, you know, after shows. So Abu is just naturally always there, and like I mean, he's not from Pakistan. I think his background, he's from Afghanistan, but like we're kind of all in the region, right? I mean, the truth is we're all brown. Like that's kind of like, I mean, that's how I would put it, right? So we're just like, okay, well, at some point it'd be cool to have like, you know, Abu join us, and then that just happened. I believe it happened like a year later. Like we are kind of teasing, we are trying to do it, but there's nothing, like there's no opportunity coming up for us to like formally introduce Abu. I think what we did was we had a little storyline with Dynasty at our student shows. In Dynasty, it's usually like Jackson Roy and Mikey Truth tag, but they also have Soy Archer. They've had him for a while. Then they introduced D Smith, right? So it was a perfect time for us, because it was just myself and Ahmed, and then Abu had his own set of problems with Jackson, because he would always wrestle him for like the Rising Stars title, and then we would always wrestle Jackson and Mikey, me and Ahmed. So we were just like, okay, well, at some point we should just interfere during Abu's matches, one of the matches, and help him win against, Jackson, and then start this whole, dynasty faction versus faction thing. It would be perfect. And that's how it did. It ended up being like that. I mean, at the end of the day, these are just student shows. Like, it sounds like, I'm telling you this crazy creative plan that we had for ourselves, but it just worked out. It was all in, good fun, and it turned out well because we had a good reason to get Abu involved. And it's been great. Like, I mean, tag wrestling is a lot of fun. Right now, I mean, this past year, Abu and Ahmed have tagged a lot. And a big reason for the last 5, 6 months for that, as I've mentioned to you when we were talking earlier before this interview, I tore my ACL in the summer. So I haven't been able to wrestle in a couple months. So they've gotten the chance to tag a lot. But, I mean, tag wrestling is one thing. I feel like doing trios with them has been so much fun. We've done a bunch of trios matches this year. We did a trios match for Ring of Honor in Quebec City back in March of 2024. And it was amazing. It was just so much fun. Like, tag wrestling to me is just like, my bread and butter. That's how I got started. And it's always going to have a special place in my heart. But when we got Abu in, or anytime, I think, if I'm not wrong, we might have done trios matches where either Abu or Ahmed were swapped out. And I know they've done trios matches where I'm not there because of like my injury or whatnot. But yeah, anytime there's like a 6-man tag match, it's amazing. And I feel like the reason why, and to answer the second part of your question, is because of, growing up watching those factions like the Shield and Wyatt family, and the kind of impression that had on me at my first live event when I went to watch this as a 14-year-old kid. I just thought it was so cool. Like, there's like 6 guys just beating the crap out of each other. The tables are out. They're like beating each other with kendo sticks. Like, there's so much chaos. There's a lot of chaotic energy when it comes to trios wrestling, I feel. And I feel like those kind of matches are the best. And we've had matches like that where there's a lot of chaotic energy. There's so much going on. So, and I feel like, as a group and even as individuals, we thrive on that chaotic energy. If anytime you see Ahmed, like, the stuff he does is just fantastic. Like, his character work is brilliant because he's just yelling and he's always like, and just like this in the zone. And it's funny because I feel like our group dynamic isn't like that where all 3 of us do that. We usually let him do that. Abu's kind of like, like the it's kind of like the smooth talker, but he's the very, like, the athletic guy in the group where he's doing all those high flying moves that me and Ahmed or any of us, like, we don't really do. And then for me, I'm more of like the smooth talker. I'm more of like, trying to like find the easy way out, doing things in like a cheap way and stuff like that. So we have like a different, and I feel like our dynamics, like, now they complement each other, the way we function as a group, which I find to be a lot of fun. So, and I feel grateful to be in that position, like, to be in a group, to be in a trio. And like, now we also have Karu, who's been like doing some stuff with us. So there's about 4 of us now. We had Clydesdale Kane, who's in Australia now. He wrestled 1 tag match, I think, with Ahmed for Norfolk County Wrestling. This is like fresh when I first got my injury, so he kind of filled in for me there. But we always take him in as an honorary member of the group because he's also on the cage match. That's another thing. We did this whole promo where there's a like Karu. The reason why, honestly, Karu even like got involved with KPK was like this running joke we had with him for a little while. He was on our cage match, which is like, the database for wrestlers. I'm not telling you, I'm just letting anybody who's watching know what a cage match is. It's just a database for wrestlers. And within KPK's cage match, I mean, it was myself, Ahmed, Abu, and then Karu was there the whole time for some reason. So we're like, we did this whole promo where I'm like, you're already on the cage match, you might as well help us. So that's how we came to join KPK. But I like that, we're growing in numbers. And like, for me, it's not just the trios. Like, growing up, especially when I was a high school dude, I appreciated like the larger groups. Like, I loved DX's run in like the late 90s when there's multiple of them. Like, there's many of them, right? I mean, there was that last little bit of DX in the late 2000s when it was just Shawn and Triple H, but I loved the larger group that they had initially. In high school, I loved watching everything Bullet Club was doing when Cody Rhodes became their leader for a bit, and then I think they had like a civil war or something going on towards the end of I think it was like 2018 or something, when they're all fighting for the leadership spot. I love that like era of Bullet Club. You had guys like Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, Young Bucks, all these like great like wrestlers and characters. So for me, I think the back of my mind was always a thing. I was like, I always fantasized about having my own group in wrestling, and like now that I have it, I'm just like, it just it's crazy to me. Like I feel so grateful to be in that position where I have something like that, where we're working together in harmony. And like the best part about it is like we're all friends outside of it too, right? Like I haven't been in the scene for a few months now due to my injury, but we're always talking every single day. Like we have our little group chat, we'll hang out. Like we've gone to the movies before, we've gone to the Christmas market, so we have a friendship, and I think that is so valuable. This is rare to find, not just in wrestling, but just in life in general. Like how many times are you going to find like-minded people where you can have such like strong group synergy with, right? So I just feel very fortunate to be in that position.
Okay, so talk to me then about your goals for your career moving forward as well as KPK. Is it very basic in the sense that, hey, I want to be on this company's roster, I want to wrestle this particular person, or is it much deeper than that?
Yeah, so early on when I started in wrestling when I was a kid, everybody dreams the same. I feel like we all have the same dreams. Like, I want to main event WrestleMania one day. Part of that dream still is there. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna say I wouldn't love to do that. That is like the end goal for every. That's the end game. Like, if you get to do that, like if you work towards that, that's great. But I feel like as I've grown and hopefully matured, or at least I think I've been maturing, the goal evolves. It's not exactly the same. Getting to wrestle on Ring of Honor this year was a huge blessing, and I know we've put in the work to be in those positions where we receive opportunities, but I still think that the factor of luck really plays into it, because it was just we happen to get it and we happen to do well with it. But I feel like there was a reason behind us getting that opportunity, for me at least, and I'll speak for myself, because being there backstage in that environment, being backstage for All Elite Wrestling and seeing how things work, how wrestling is if you are working for them, was a great insight into like understanding, well, how would it be if my goal was to get signed for them one day. This is how it is, right? This is like, I can see what they're doing, how they're moving around. This is just another work day for them, work week for them. This could be me. So for me it was like, okay, well, I want to work towards this, right? But then there's also the idea, because I've never done any backstage extra work for like WWE, and that's a little different because they they're also a big company and they obviously have their own way of doing things. So I don't have that point of reference where I can compare the two to understand where would I like to be. I mean, for me, ideally, for any wrestler, it's like get signed and work for a big company and do, because you ideally, like for me now, the idea is I would want to get signed because, well, I'm doing something I love, but also you're making a living off it. I don't have to worry about having a day job anymore, right? I mean, this is it. This is what's paying the bills. Like, this is how I make a living. And then if I want to do anything on the side, if I have any of my own businesses or something, sure. But for me now, I mean, the goal is that, getting signed one day would be great. But, thinking about myself and as like us as a group as a whole, and like just being in a space where there's so many amazing independent wrestlers who honestly have never gotten signed or were signed for a period of time, and seeing how they go about wrestling it's very motivating. And also it influences you, because you see people just doing this unsigned, but they're traveling the world and they have the creative freedom, and they have the freedom to do whatever they want with like their gimmicks or their characters or where they want to work. And I feel like that's also very valuable, and that's something special to have. So while you can chase the end goal of being signed and being on TV and working as a wrestler full time, I feel like it's very important to set those small short-term goals to like step up on to get to that longer end term goals. And for me right now, my focus is really on the short term, where I'm thinking of where I see myself in a year or two, or like I have all these goals listed out for me before I turn 30, because I'm just 24 years old right now. And the biggest thing I've learned while being with KPK or just being in wrestling is I really enjoy the aspect of travel, being able to go to different parts of the world where people are doing the same thing that we're doing here locally. And I think that just fascinates me so much. We're wrestling, we do all these roles and all these drills. Then you take a flight and you fly down to like Florida or something, couple hours, and then you go to some wrestling gym there and they're doing the exact same thing. And it's so fascinating how like, our world of wrestling is like, it's so universal, the language that we speak in the ring, right? Like that physical language where we're doing this. So for me right now, the goal is to really be able to travel as much as I can with the KPK guys and be able to do what we do here locally, but on now like on an international level too, because I feel like that's more fun, right? A lot of people, I feel like, if and luck plays a huge role in this too. If you're just that guy or that girl, or you just train and then immediately get signed, I mean, I feel like you kind of miss out on the fun parts of like, the grind and the journey, right? The struggle of like being an independent wrestler, which I'm really enjoying right now. I think it's a lot of fun being able to go to random towns in Ontario that I didn't even know existed to wrestle for this company. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. But the crowd, like, this is the first time they're seeing you, but they're responding to you, right? You walk out and you have this energy, they know your heels, they're just gonna start booing you. And I think that's so fascinating that like we can, control like how the emotions of an audience, even though we've never met the audience before, right? And you can only do that when you're on the independent level, when you're not established, when they don't really know you and they're getting to know you. It's like, it's so funny. It's like the initial stages of like dating, when you meeting someone, you're getting these butterflies, getting to know each other. That's how it feels, man, in the ring, right? When you're getting to know the audience, like, like the specific, like, okay, this is how they are in London, Ontario. Okay, well, this is how they are in North Bay, right? Like, they might love us in like London, but they hate us in North Bay. And that could be because in one promotion we're faces, in one we're heels. Or we could be heels in both, but just like one crowd loves our heel work so much that they can't help but cheer us. And then one really understands what we're going for, so they boo the living hell out of us, right? So I think that's the beauty of it. And like for me right now, it's just the short-term goals, man. Like I'm really just, it's just these stepping stones that I'm putting for myself to like reach what, that essential end game would be as a wrestler. But what I'm really trying to do is like enjoy the journey, because I feel like if you're like, you're at the very bottom, like you're just standing on like a grass field and you're looking at the mountaintop, like it just seems like a pipe dream. It seems impossible getting there. But if you just do it day by day, you're just doing it, you're in the grind and it's consistency, you're getting somewhere, you're moving forward, right? You're not staying static. So that's definitely a really big goal for me moving forward, especially with like my injury and the recovery that I'm going with right now. It's just like keep moving forward, right? Like there shouldn't be any stopping. So those little small consistent steps will hopefully, take us to where we are going to be at the end of the day.
I think that that's actually invaluable advice. I think that anybody who's getting into wrestling, for example, Edge, when he first started, he didn't think, hey, my goal is to be in a PSP video game on the roster to inspire another wrestler in the future. The
Yeah.
goal is just the next step, and eventually that stuff will happen.
Yeah.
Listen, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me. Before we sign out, can you just let everybody know again who you are, and if they want to follow you, where they can like kind of keep up to date with what you got going on, drop you a follow on social media, things like that?
Absolutely, yeah. So, Karachi Driver Harun, member of KPK. If you want to follow me on Instagram, where I am the most active, it would be at HRNXMD. I do also have a link tree within the Instagram, so you can find all our other links there. But if I was to mention them, TikTok, I would be KPK Harun. We also have our, I think it's our YouTube is the KPK Wrestling, but HRNXMD on Instagram. If you can get there, there's a link tree. Everything is there. We have, I need to work on my social media game, be consistent with my with my ads, because they're all over the place. But Instagram is the main one. Anybody has any questions, anyone wants to reach out. I know Sandro, you reached out to me on Instagram, so I think that's the best place to hit me up. But I also want to thank you. Like, this is amazing. I love talking about wrestling. I love sharing bits and pieces of my journey, and I hope that someone watching this who wants to do this can learn something from this. And I hope it helps them in their journey, not just with wrestling, but with life, right? I mean, there's always something you can pick on from whatever. But yeah, I really appreciate this, man. I don't want to talk all day now. So, I'll give it back to you. But thank you so much for this. This was great.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for tuning in to Independent Wrestling Profiles. Please help out the show if you can with a like, subscription, or review. We'll see you next time.